Welcome to another episode of How I'm Building This, where we interview CEOs and founders who are in the thick of building their businesses. We learn from their mistakes and get practical tips to overcoming challenges. Today we have Josh from Accelsius. Josh, thank you so much for joining. How are you today?
I'm fine. It's nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Josh, before we, of course, jump into the business, would love to learn, who's Josh, where did you grow up, and what really got you to Accelsius?
Well, it's been a pretty long journey, so I'll try to be succinct. So I grew up in a small farm town, actually, in Illinois, between a pig farm and a cornfield. I think for that reason, I had aspirations of becoming more worldly. Went to college, then studied Japanese.
Wow.
Yeah, it got me on this sort of international track. I went to part of my grad school in Japan. My first company, which was NCR, sent me as sort of an experimental expat to back to Japan
Wow.
for an 18-month assignment that lasted for a few years, lasted for 4 or 5 years. Um, and then I was sort of sold on just doing that. And so I came back to the US, managed a BU in Latin America, and then was sent back to Australia, um, where I met my wife, actually. And then sent to London, and then Australia, and then London.
Oh, wow.
And so spent 12 years in London. In fact, about 23 years, I think, of my professional life have been living internationally. I think that sort of informed sort of the way I think about things. All of my career has been in high tech, initially big tech, NCR, AT&T, 10 years at Dell. Um, and then I decided, I think I had this continuous fantasy about working for a smaller company. And I think a lot of big company guys do. No, however enviable your position seen in the big companies, I think when you're driving home at night, you have this sort of fantasy about, what if I worked for a smaller company that I could shape more? So I was a chief business officer, president of two mid-cap companies, and then I started doing startups. So I have this sort of Benjamin Button's career where I started big and went smaller and smaller, and I couldn't go back. Like, I'm sure you talk to a lot of entrepreneurs and guys who are immersed in the startup world. It's hard to go back to a big company after you've experienced this chaos and this adventure,
Yeah,
in the small company world.
I completely get it. I've spent most of my career, within startups and small businesses, and I'm personally just like drawn to that. It just seems so much fun. There's just so much more. You're just not another number,
Yeah.
and I think that's what really has been exciting for me personally. But Josh, but that said, though, right? What's like a hobby or a passion that you have that most people wouldn't really think that a CEO would have?
Well, I mean, I have some pretty usual ones. I like to hike. I like to get out in nature as much as possible. I like to bike pack, which is a sport that most people have never heard of, but it's basically backpacking with a bicycle. And so that's been fun for me to get out. I find that nature sort of refreshes me. But on a weekly basis, I garden.
Oh,
I
nice.
like to get dirty and sweaty. I think that's sort of the antithesis of working in an office and managing a company. So there's something very grounding, I think, about planting and digging and getting dirty. And I know it sounds a little eccentric, but for me, it's very normalizing to
That's
do
awesome.
activities like that.
That's awesome, Josh. So hiring at your stage is by far one of the most critical things. Um, what is your North Star when it comes to identifying top talent beyond the resume that you see? And like, are there like, any uncoachable traits that you tend to look for?
Yeah, I do. And, hiring is probably the hardest thing any of us really do. None of us, I mean, a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm a great interviewer." I'm a lousy interviewer, honestly. And I think most people probably are. It's hard to get a sense of someone in an hour, or having them meet the entire team for, an hour at a time. But I will say that I do The older I've become, um, the more I become kind of idealistic about people, about humans, and what they're capable of. And the more I move away from some typical corporate structures or views. But what I look for personally is curiosity. Um, they have to be, they have to ask me a lot. They have to really already come equipped with good questions, not the
Sure.
platitudinal sort of stuff, but like, why did you make that decision? Like, that didn't make sense to me. I researched your company and you did that, and it seemed counterintuitive, which means they're really thinking deeply about these things. I look for uh, sort of a collaborative spirit.
Okay.
What's given them gratification in the past? Has it been some team achievement? Has it been some individual promotion they've received? And you can parse that out in a number of ways and try to understand that. And then finally, and this is going to seem very probably Pollyanna-ish, I don't know, but I think I look for some sign of kindness.
Huh.
Right. We always talk about integrity, and I think
Sure.
that's kind of a given. Obviously, I don't want to hire anyone that doesn't have high ethical standards. But I think I think a lot of the sort of foundation of integrity and ethics is just a sense of kindness. I'm gonna treat the people I work with well. I'm gonna support them. I'm not gonna compete with them. I'm gonna sort of relish the accomplishments we do together,
Mhm.
right? And so that's really what I'm looking for. And a lot of times other people have interviewed someone before I interview them, and they're focused on what's their expertise in that area, what's their competence. But to create a culture that I wanted to in this company particularly, that's really what I interview for.
That's awesome. Leading into culture, at your stage, company culture now starts to, of course, solidify, right? You have about 65, 70 folks that are working with you. How would you describe your culture th- that you're intentionally building, of course? But then, what are some of those things that you've done that are helping you implement that culture vision that you have for your business?
Yeah, the first one is obviously hiring people that have the basic attributes that I'm looking for.
Sure.
Second, I really believe that aligning to a mission is really important. What are we trying to achieve? Is everyone informed? So we tend to be almost embarrassingly transparent. I mean, when I'm fundraising, I tell the team what my strategy is.
Yeah.
If we're going after a given partner to recruit that partner, we talk openly about the pros and cons of that partner. And I'm going to do that for as long as I can, right? We have about 77 people on board now. I'm going to do that for as long as I can. But I think transparent communication leads to trust.
Okay.
So, and that outweighs the downside. Obviously, confidential relationships and things like that you can't reveal, but as open as you can be, it creates a foundation of, oh, okay, I understand, I have the context, and I can continue to operate in a mode that aligns me to the mission of the company. Um, the other, I think, key attribute is in terms of our culture, and I describe it as sort of a social experiment because honestly, this is really the first company I've really leaned into to do this, and I've had kind of complete control to do this, and that is treating people like grown-ups. And that sounds like a silly thing to say, but if people are aligned to a culture, I mean, to a mission, and they're curious and collaborative, then you don't need a vacation policy.
Yeah.
You don't need to prescribe when they work in the office and when they work at home. You don't need to do that. And I've always wanted to just go whole hog into that, and I've been able to now. And guess what we've seen? We've seen the no vacation policy. Our concern tends to err on the side of, hey, these few people aren't taking enough vacation. They need a
Wow.
recharge. We've actually, by having no policy, they've sort of overcorrected. Um,
Wow.
by having no remote policy, people are highly productive. And Now we're lucky. We're a hard tech company. Mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, thermal engineers like to collaborate.
Yeah,
And I get so much gratification walking through the office and seeing people huddled around a whiteboard just trying to solve a problem. And they could be cross-functional teams. I haven't orchestrated that. Their direct management probably hasn't orchestrated that. It's just people saying, I have a problem. Could you just help me think through this?
yeah,
And so I think some of the professions we've hired have made this. Let me say it this way: probably de-risk my social experiment because they like to collaborate. They like to come into the office. They like to just lean over and say, "Hey, have you ever run across this issue before?"
that's amazing.
So maybe my job's been made slightly easier than some other, like a software company, a purely, software or SaaS platform. So, but that's really what I'm trying to do. And I want people to smile in the office. I want them to want to come to work. Again, those sound like ideals or aspirations that are hard to achieve. So far, that's one of the aspects I'm most proud of in
That's
our
amazing.
so far 3-year journey here.
That's amazing. So Josh, I mean, how do you see this potentially changing? So let's say today you have 77 employees. This now goes to about 250, 300, hopefully. How do you see culture evolving?
I hope it doesn't evolve or change that much.
Okay.
It's going to have to. I mean, the reality is you have more people, but that's where hiring comes back and coaching my leaders and my first line managers because they need to live this culture. Like if I'm saying this stuff and a first line manager is saying, I want to see you in, 7 o'clock Monday, and I don't want to see you leave until seven o'clock PM Friday. That's obviously not what I want to
Yeah.
promote. So, having managers that like this culture, that want to convey it and grow it is really important. The other thing is when we do see behaviors that I don't like, that I think are corrosive, can create this sort of, God, I'm sounding like some hippie. I don't know, but creating some sort of negative energy,
Sure.
conflict, stress that is not about the mission. It's about a personal interaction,
Yeah.
or someone's condescended to someone or cut them off and not listen to them. I try to really stamp down on that really fast
Wow.
because if you let it grow, it's sort of a natural human tendency, especially for stressed out, busy people. So I try to tamp that down really, really quickly.
That's awesome. Josh, would love to jump into the business.
Sure.
What's the founding story behind Accelsius?
So the the seed investor I have, and they still own a majority of Accelsius, has a model where they got to multinationals, and multinationals do a lot of R&D, and they do it for a reason, right? They think they need this, but when it comes to commercializing, it's not always a high priority for that company.
Sure.
So that's what this Inventure is the name of the company. That's what they do. They had been negotiating with Bell Labs around a two-phase direct-to-chip technology
Okay.
because they thought there was a need. And so just before that had all been negotiated and transacted, they hired me to sort of be the founding CEO of this. Um, I was excited. One, it brought me back to the data center and IT infrastructure space. And two, it was clearly a need for a couple of reasons. Initially, we were intrigued because of sustainability. Data centers traditionally have been incredibly inefficient. They spend about 40% of their energy on cooling rather than compute. And that was sort of accepted. It's like, well, this is how we run data centers. I mean, and the cost was just passed on to their clients. No real thought went into, I shouldn't say that, it sounds disparaging, but not enough thought, certainly from my um, perspective, went into sustainability, efficiency, et cetera. So I was already sold on that. It's something I'd thought about for over the years. But then you see this sort of exponential growth in chip wattages. You
Okay.
see CPUs and GPUs just, they were hovering around 100, 130 watts for years, and then 150, and then 200, and then the H100, the first real AI GPU, 700 watts, and then the Blackwell's 1200 watts, and so you see this just go up. So the need for precision cooling technology that is very efficient was obviously there. It was interesting though, about 6 months after we founded the company, ChatGPT was released. So it's really, it was sort of backwards. But suddenly, so the impetus was efficient precision cooling of very, very high density chips.
Okay.
The urgency then came, and our timing was right for
Yeah.
this, came because now people just need to cool these things to implement AI. So even though we can do it more efficiently and more sustainably, that's not really the conversation. It's just, Josh, how do I cool these things?
How do I
And how
cool?
do I
Yeah.
cool the next generation, the next
Yeah.
generation? So that was sort of the founding story. I will say just one more comment on that. Um, I hired a great set of leaders, kind of right off the bat, that are still with me. And we've seen some of the movie before in whatever sector that companies like dealing with great businesses. So it's not really a Silicon Valley approach where we have great technology, we throw it over the fence. It's no, we're going to have to be with them if there's an issue. We're going to have to design products that are serviceable and robust and high quality. We're going to have to deal with our supply chain, which is pretty complicated in a very professional way. And we're going to have to recruit partners in a very professional way. And so we decided from almost the first few weeks that our mission is, yeah, we have to invent this technology, this two-phase direct-to-chip. It really didn't exist. We needed a commercial, industrialize it, productize it, make it robust and serviceable, to a data center standard, which is very high. And then we needed to become a great company to back that up. And so our burn was probably higher. I mean, hard tech is
Sure.
expensive,
Yeah.
but our burn was probably even higher than that it typically is, because this sort of became our religion from day one.
Wow, that's amazing. It's amazing. So Josh, on your website, you say revolutionary liquid cooling is here.
Yeah.
It seems very obvious to me, but what is the problem that you're solving, and specifically for whom?
So the problem we're solving is sort of has a few elements. One is we wanted to design. Remember, 3 years ago, people were saying air will be fine. And when we first presented Data Center World about 3 years ago, um, and I said, liquid's coming, so let's choose the right liquid architecture.
Hmm.
I was almost mugged in the hallways after the talk. Like, that's not, we've been talking about liquid forever. You're so naive. It's fine. A year later, it's like everyone's like, liquid, you need liquid to cool these things, right? But what we wanted to do was design a liquid architecture and cooling solution that really matches the design vocabulary of a data center and their priorities. And one was that we can create a little future proofing, that our two-phase refrigerant-based cooling actually can support the Blackwell, it can support the Rubin, it can support the generation after that, right? And we've tested those high heat densities and high wattages already with our product. The other one was that the first mover in liquid cooling is water.
Sure.
You'll hear PG25, or it's a mix of glycol and water, but it's conductive. And water has a problem in that there's an absolute linear relationship between flow rate and heat transport.
Okay.
And so if you go from a 10 kilowatt rack, which was traditional for 30 years, to a 100 kilowatt rack, to now what NVIDIA is talking about, a 600 kilowatt rack, you're talking about 1,000 liters per minute of flow rate, going
Wow.
through very small orifices, actually damaging components of its own loop, and then potentially being devastating if there's a leak. And there are leaks. And there'll be leaks with ours. But when we leak, we spray a little non-conductive vapor.
Okay.
So we don't damage what is now maybe $3 to $5 million of IT equipment in a rack. So we didn't want our solution to risk hurting the technology it was designed to protect, which water-based solutions do. And then finally, we really wanted to drive home a total cost of ownership math that was so compelling. And what we allow to do is we have a very efficient cooling loop in, say, a GPU rack. And so what that connects to in a typical liquid cooled data center is a big primary water loop of water, which then carries the heat to the rooftop. If we can allow that water to be warmer, for every 1 degree centigrade that water is warmer, it saves about 4% energy per year. And
Wow.
we think we can warm versus single phase water because of the efficiency of the refrigerant based system. We can warm at 6 to 12 degrees.
Okay.
So we basically, compared to water, we become almost a free cooling solution compared to water. Compared to air, we're even more attractive. So that's why we say revolutionary. It really is revolutionary. And I think it's going to lead to a whole phase of almost completely refrigerant-based data centers over the next few years.
That's amazing. So how do you take this edge that you all have, clearly created, and how do you message that edge to your prospective customers?
So the messaging is actually pretty easy.
Okay.
Um, it's a compelling differentiation or set of differentiators. That's pretty easy. What the challenge is in the data center sector, this is a really conservative sector,
Okay.
which is somewhat ironic. It's high tech. They're
Sure.
always moving in higher powered switching and compute, but it's very conservative. And they don't like to really put their necks out. They don't want to say, "I get your technology. I'm going to do this."
Yeah.
They kind of have to move together. And
Oh, interesting. Okay.
so in terms of tech adoption and that sort of typical curve of tech adoption, on our side, we have the need. They have to cool these chips.
Yeah.
We have the urgency because AI is happening and AI data centers and factories are being created. So there's the urgency. What we spend a lot of time is educating, overcoming objections that are thrown out at us or thrown out by competitive architectures. And so what we find that's really nice is that the most sophisticated players in the market get why they need us. The rest will come.
The rest will come. Yeah.
Um, the rest will come. But yeah, what we stress about is how fast is adoption happening? Is there a risk to adoption? What are the conversations happening in the market? And so, that's for every one of your viewers or listeners that have brought new tech, potentially disruptive tech to a sector, they've had the same concerns, the same 3 a.m. wake ups where you're thinking, is this happening fast enough? Are we
Yeah.
missing something? That sort of thing.
I see that. So Josh, does that mean that your sales cycles are just tremendously long, and
They're
they're
long
very,
and
very
they're long and
relationship based?
yeah, they're long. They're becoming shorter, as you would
Okay,
expect.
that's good.
And initially they're long because with the new technology, you have to do a proof of concept. It's not something we can debate. They want to see this work in their environment. They want to see the data on it. We're totally aligned with that. The other thing is because it's a new technology, a lot of people enter the sales cycle from the client side. It's like we've approved that quote. We're going to send you a PO. Oh wait, Sally's gotten involved or
I
Joe's
see that.
gotten involved, and they're not sure. We got to get them up to speed on this new
Oh, wow.
technology. And again, that's a really typical story. You could find analogies for that in any disruptive tech across mission critical sectors, right? There's going to be um, a lot of votes, and one no vote delays the process.
Yes.
So what we found is we're very good at calling opportunities
Okay.
and saying, this is going to close. We're terrible at calling when it's going to close, right? Which again, I think is probably a very common phenomenon
Sure.
with startups, right?
Yeah, that's fair. So that said, though, Josh, then what are some of the key metrics that you're closing right now? Sorry, that you're focused on right now to not only gauge
Yeah.
the growth of your business, but to also gauge the health of your business.
Well, we focus, as an early indicator. We have a lot of conversations in the market which help inform our product line. And we decided up front that we're going to have a product line, not a product.
Oh,
Data
interesting. Okay.
centers struggle to deal with a one product company. And so about a year ago, we started, based on the innovations we did in the first product, we have product lines that increase thermal performance, that have different designs for different use cases. And by, Q1 of next year, we'll have a really comprehensive product line that we're
Right.
excited about. And that's, we just celebrated our third year anniversary. So I think that's good progress. The um, I lost my train of thought. What was the question again? You
Uh,
can edit that out.
no, that's fine. Well, we were talking about the metrics that you're
Oh, the
gauging,
metrics. So the
not only
metrics for us are,
for growth, but also health.
yeah, the metrics are leading indicators,
Okay,
pipeline, gross pipeline.
got it.
But then I have a new category because we are trying to really deconstruct the sales cycle. It's a proposal pipeline. So this is
Okay,
actually, we're already iterating on quotes, configurations. So how quickly do we close from initial proposal to conversion to revenue? And we're really focused on that because that sort of discrete detail, that discrete phase in the pipeline allows us to really learn. Did we misstate something? Did we not see that some other party in that client would have a vote? Why
sure,
did we not anticipate that?
sure,
So we're
sure.
constantly trying to learn and improve based on that. But pipeline, and then of course TOs, orders, and then revenue, of course, are metrics for us.
Absolutely. Josh, how do you ensure, especially within hard tech, that product, sales, marketing, customer success, everyone is working together for that shared goal, which is which could be
Yeah,
revenue, which could be growth percentage, valuation, whatever that case might be.
yeah.
I mean, how do you ensure that they're all working together?
We communicate a lot as
Okay,
as a complete team. Um, and then, of course, my leadership team is comprised of my COO, who's head of ops and supply chain manufacturing, my chief revenue officer, my CTO and product dev chief. So in our weekly meetings, we're debating about trade-offs, priorities. If one function's slipping, how do we all kind of lean in and help them recover from that slipping? We do facetiously, we talk about spinning the blowtorch a little bit. So when one product bill of materials is locked and the design is locked, then the blowtorch spins to my COO to get tack times, build, refine assembly instructions, do all of that, right, and control obviously the entire supply chain. So we talk a lot about that, and then the
sure.
blowtorch spins to the CRO. Okay, now you have to create demand for this and that sort of
Yeah,
thing. But we're still at the size of a team that cross-functional collaboration is not a concern of mine. It's not an issue.
that's
It
amazing.
will become one over time, but right now, luckily, it's still not a concern.
Yeah, that's awesome. Um, as someone who's had such a successful career so far, right? I mean, you've worked across the world, traveled across the world, led massive BUs at Dell, etc. I would love to learn what is the one biggest piece of BS advice that you've gotten now that you are sitting in the founding CEO seat?
Wow, that's a good one. It's commonly said that follow your passion is terrible advice. I think it is. I think that's terrible advice. Not that I'm not all for people following their passion, but if you're come out of college or you're, in your 20s, you don't know what your passion is.
Yeah,
By and large, you're not because you haven't sampled enough things. Um, so I think that's kind of bad advice typically when it's sort of meaningless. I don't know what that means. I mean, I like gardening. So should I have been a gardener? I mean, what does that mean, right?
yeah,
I can always
exactly.
garden,
Yeah,
but also that I think learning is hard and not always fun.
sure.
When I think back in my career, I did some jobs because a mentor or someone said, you really need a background in that. You don't want to do that. I understand, but do it for 2 years. I mean, finance was an example of for me. I didn't want to be a financial analyst or a planner. I didn't want to grow up and be a CFO. I had no desire. It just was painful. But I did it for a couple of years because a mentor said. And by the way, those were like 16-hour days, and
Sure.
so I think hard work and doing some things you don't want to do if they're for a purpose, not just for drudgery, But if you're trying to build a CV that allows you to be a CEO or a COO, think think I think it's important to think very explicitly about what are those gaps in my CV and my
Hmm.
experience and my expertise that I never really want to be caught out on.
Yeah, that's
I don't want to allow CFO to, you know, BS me in some way. I don't want
yeah,
to allow my chief engineer to.
yeah.
So I think that's a good way to think about it. But not all work is fun. All work should be, you should be learning in every job, right?
That's absolutely
And
fair.
some jobs you're going to absolutely love, some jobs you're going to love less. But you should, if you're not learning in a job, get out of the job, would be my advice, right? It's different than
That's
follow your passion, but
sure.
don't be bludgeoned by boredom. I mean, that there's life's too short for that, right?
Absolutely. Josh, the one thing that's not really spoken out loud too much is about managing mental health. Um, now that you're in that founding CEO seat, I'm sure gardening helps you a lot, but how do you really manage your mental health to ensure that you're the best version of yourself, not only for your family, but also for work?
Well, you assume I do, right? Maybe I don't manage my mental health.
Presuming you
I
do.
think there are probably some people who argue that maybe I don't do that well. I, uh, I, I, I tend to breathe through things.
Okay.
I mean, literally and figuratively. There's as an early stage CEO can be raising money, trying to develop strategic relationships, trying to manage an operational issue, trying to manage a client all at one time. And now and then, just stepping back. The way I step back is I ride my bike or I garden, and I just get away from it. You have to get away from it sometimes. And my best ideas, by the way, my breakthrough ideas, and this is absolutely a platitude, but it's true with me, are when I'm riding my bike or taking a long walk, walking my dog. That's when I solve things. So I think everyone's going to have a different approach to that, but I think taking a step back and then reminding yourself, this is what I do with myself a lot, that the real pleasure I get from practicing business is not about the money. It's not about any of that. It's about problem solving.
Yeah.
And so if I'm stressed about a problem I have, I step back, and I do this sometimes explicitly and say, wait a minute, what stimulates you is tough problems. You have a tough problem in front of you that's stressing you out. Now just take a step back and solve it. And that's the real pleasure that comes out of doing business. Just every day is a new problem to solve, an optimization problem or a decision, or and so that's the way I do it personally. I'm not sure that's helpful to anyone else, but that's my approach.
It's definitely helpful, Josh. Josh, selfishly, I have learned so much from you. This has just been so much fun. But I'd love to learn what is next for you. What's next for Accelsius?
Well, I think we're going to have a pretty exciting journey ahead of us. That we're in a hot sector, which is lucky. We're a solution that is required. That's lucky. Um, so I think the next stage for us, now that we've kind of developed a foundation of great technology, we've developed a great team. There's a lot of market interest. The pipeline grows, the POs are flowing. The next big challenge is scaling,
Yeah.
and scaling is hard, and it's a challenge. It's a problem to be solved, but we have to scale. We may have to scale radically with quality. Right now, we've anticipated a lot of that. We have good partners that help us do some contract manufacturing. And we have a great COO internally that has really thoughtfully sort of lay out a plan for us. But it is a hair-raising exercise. Anyone that's honest with you, particularly in hard tech, it's a hair-raising exercise to go from 100 units to a few thousand units. And these are big appliances, right? I mean, it's
Sure.
space, it's capital investment, it's working capital, it's all these things. And so I think that's what's going to lay in front of us as the challenge. Now, that's a challenge every early stage company wants to have to face, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So no complaints, but I wouldn't discount the complexity of some of that.
That's amazing. How can folks keep up with you?
Well, we post a lot on LinkedIn. I write a lot of art. I mean, um, a few articles, a quarter, um, on issues that I think are relevant to people around the sector. I don't pontificate about things outside my rails, but there's a lot to think about. And for data center operators, um, I feel sorry for these folks. I mean, it's been a fairly staid industry for decades, and suddenly it's what is my power? How do I bring 600 kilowatts to a rack? How do I cool these things? How do I? There's there's a lot. So I try to write things, and my team writes a lot of blogs and papers on how to think about these issues, the pros, cons, trade-offs. And so I think that's LinkedIn is a great way to keep up with me.
That's amazing. Josh, once again, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. This has been immense learning. And again, thank you just so much for giving us some time today.
It's been a lot of fun talking to you. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye bye.